Well, I threw a party a couple weeks ago, which if you didn't get an invite, it was a very exclusive invite. It was just two people, me and God, and it was a pity party. So it's probably for the best that you weren't there. But really, it was just my normal devotional time, but I like to journal and just be honest about what's in my heart. And I was telling God I was frustrated because as a leader here at the church and in life, I was trying to accomplish some things that I knew were good and would be beneficial, but there was just so much hassle trying to get there. And I was just being honest with the Lord, like, why is this so hard? Why is there so much irritation and opposition to doing something good? I'm trying to get us someplace we're meant to be. Why is there all this friction? And I just felt frustration and had to voice that to him, which I imagine I'm not the only person who's ever been in a place like that. That you go, there's just a lot of friction. I'm trying to get to a place that's good. Why is life like this? And some of you go, Ben, that's my commute every day to work. You're like, I'm trying to get right there. Just, can you get your whole situation over there? Just let me get there. And some of you, that's your commute. Or some of you feel that at work. You're like, you know what? I'm just trying to get this deal done. It's a good deal for everybody. I'm just trying to get these papers signed. I'm just trying to get this building built. I'm just trying to get a meeting scheduled. Can we just at least get a meeting? And some of you realize, why is life so frustrating sometimes? And the reality is, if we're honest, for many of us, an excessive amount of friction and frustration can become futility. Well, then just forget it. Is any good coming my way? And if we're not careful, we can get discouraged. And I mentioned that because it was interesting for me in that moment where I was just processing with the Lord, just trying to be honest with him. I was devotionally in the book of Joshua, the passage we just read. And it was funny because if you don't know who Joshua is or where it fits in the biblical narrative, in the first book of the Bible, Genesis, when humanity breaks faith with God, everything breaks. The world's no longer as it should be. But right away, God creates a solution. In Genesis 12, he picks one man named Abraham and tells Abraham, move to this strategic piece of real estate. I'm gonna bless you. And then from your seed, one of your descendants, I will bless every family on the earth. So Genesis, Abraham moves to this strategic piece of land, and there he buys a little bit of the real estate, has a kid, and that's really much of the book of Genesis. And a couple generations down from Abraham, there's a famine, and so his descendants have to move to Egypt to survive. And when the next book of the Bible starts, Exodus, it's been a long time, and the people, the children of Abraham, have become enslaved in Egypt. And so God raises up Moses to set his people free. And Moses leads the people out of slavery, leads them across the wilderness back into the promised land. Called that because it was promised to Abraham. I'm going to put you in this land and bless you. And then from your descendants will become one who will bless the whole world. And Moses doesn't get to take them into the promised land. He leads them right up into the river. He can see it. And then was like, okay, y'all go ahead. I'm going to go die in the wilderness. And he does. And so it's Joshua, his protege, that leads them in. So the book of Joshua is exciting at the beginning because it's just battle after battle. They show up and there's now Canaanites living in the land, which we won't go into details on this, but they were into some very dark things. And there's all this conflict between the nation of Israel and the Canaanites. And so the beginning of the book of Joshua is all battles and fights and intrigue and crazy stuff. And then by the end of it, they're successful. They move back into the promised land. And so the back half of Joshua is really just a series of allotments of real estate to the 12 tribes of Abraham. And it reads about as exciting as that sounds. And so some of you maybe like reading real estate agreements, right? For most of us, it can be a little brutal. And so back to my pity party, I was telling God, like, I'm trying to get something solved. I'm trying to get some perspective. I'm trying to move things along. And I'm about to read the Bible and what? I'm in the real estate section of Joshua. And I opened to that part and I read this little paragraph from chapter 17 I read to you. And I just felt like I could sense the Lord's laughter. Because he was like, yes, tucked into the real estate section of Joshua is this part about a group of people throwing a pity party. And in that moment, what we get and why this matters to us is what you see in this section. It's a secret. It's how to encourage a courageous heart in a discouraging day. That's what this passage is about. How to encourage a discouraged heart that it would be a courageous heart, right? That's the idea. And I use those words on purpose because cur in Latin is the word heart. And if we're not careful, for many of us, we get disheartened. Your heart is the driver of action. And if you get disheartened, you start to believe nothing I do is gonna make a difference. I won't necessarily accomplish anything good. I don't see good in the future. And I think this matters to us is because discouragement and despair is having its day right now in America. We live in a day of discouragement. Jean Twenge is a researcher, psychologist. She just released her latest book, Generations, filled with statistical data about the generations that are alive in America today. And she points out, among many things, the alarming amount of despair rampant in America, beginning in 2012, particularly among young people. And there's a lot to say about it we won't do here, but I put this stat up here. There's a long-form study she quotes where middle school and high school kids are asked to comment on these statements, and a shocking number of them agree with the statements: I can't do anything right, I do not enjoy my life is not useful. That in a digital media day, many young people, the way they're interacting with one another is sowing into their hearts discouragement. My life's not useful. I don't enjoy my life. They don't see good. They are discouraged. As a point of research, I listened to Post Malone's new album this week. I study to help you people. And first song on his new album, he says, I don't understand why you like me so much, because I don't like myself. That's how he leads out. I don't like me. Olivia Rodrigo says, I'm so insecure, I think that I'll die before I drink. I'm not cool and I'm not smart. I can't even parallel park, which in this town, that's tough. But our statisticians and our songwriters are screaming to us what I think many of us know. We live in a discouraged day. And what we have in this passage is a way to get your heart back. How do I encourage a courageous heart in the midst of a discouraged day? The people of Jesus need a heart filled with courage. And so I want to show you this passage. We'll walk through it together. And I want to give you 4 ways to encourage a courageous heart in a discouraging day. So to begin, let's start in verse 14. To set the stage, it says, the people of Joseph spoke to Joshua. Abraham's descendants, there were 12 tribes, and Joseph was one of them. And Joseph was actually so blessed, they blessed both of his kids, Ephraim and Manasseh. They're all the children of Joseph. And when it comes time to get their allotment and their portion of the land, they have an issue with it. And so in verse 14, it says, the people of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, why have you given me but one lot and one portion as an inheritance, although I'm a numerous people, since all along the Lord has blessed me? They say what every young leader says: I'm blessed, give me more. It's the heart cry of every young leader, right? Many of you, if you're honest, you've experienced this. You maybe spoke for the first time and it went well, or you led something and people actually followed, or you made a decision and it actually paid off. You did something in your job that produced good, and what happens? You're like, all right, I'm stepping into my own. Here's the moment, here it comes. And you're like, okay, I'm blessed. I'm big, I'm being used. Somebody get out of my way. Somebody help me. Somebody give me some more real estate. Make space, the king is here, right? That's the kind of mentality they're saying. We're numerous. Up until this point, God's blessed us. Why are you holding us back by just giving us one inheritance? We want more. And what's weird about the way they're talking about this is they want more land, but the way they talk to Joshua has this bizarre mix of entitlement and victimization. We've been blessed by God. We're big, but you're holding us back. So I'm entitled and a victim all at once. And what's interesting about this passage is they're questioning not just Joshua, but even God. I mean, the way that it's written, it could be translated, until now, Yahweh has blessed us. We're big, and up until this point, Yahweh's blessed us, but you're holding me back. They see their situation. I wish I had more, and I don't get it. And as they're trying to figure out, why am I not where I want to be? Why don't I have the space I want to make? They look around, and rather than looking within, they look out and say, it's your fault. Somebody is cheating me. And it's interesting, Joshua responds, and about the facts, he does not disagree. In verse 15, it says, and Joshua said to them, if you are a numerous people, go up by yourselves to the forest, and there clear ground for yourselves in the land of the Perizzites and Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you. He says, okay, big and blessed, you want some more room? Cut down some trees. You too cramped? Cut open some space. And so he doesn't hold him back. He says, no one's in your way. If you want more space, make more space, right? And what's fascinating about that is, I don't know if that crossed their mind. And so here's lesson 1 of how do you get encouragement in a discouraging day. Number 1 is, I'd say this: when you identify problems, cultivate solutions, not cynicism. Cultivate solutions, not cynicism. All right, got one amen. All right, here we go. What do I mean by that? Well, I've discovered in my experience with young leaders, leadership often presents itself as the identification of problems. That's how leadership often surfaces in someone's heart. They're a part of an organization, they're serving somewhere, they're working at an office, and they go, I think that could work better. I think that would have been a better solution to that problem. I think this workaround would get us there faster. You start to see problems, and you'd say, there's a better way to do this, or this should work better, and this should do that. And at that moment, that's good. That's the budding of leadership. And here, Joshua doesn't shame them for identifying a problem. There's a lot of us in a little bit of room. Yeah, that's a problem. He'll affirm that later. But here's the interesting, fragile moment. At that moment, you have a choice. Am I going to cultivate cynicism, or am I going to cultivate a solutions orientation? They go, hey, we got a problem, it's too narrow. And they don't even see the option of cutting down trees. They just go, Joshua's cheating us. And they see their external problems rather than externally looking for solutions. And what's so dangerous about that is if you cultivate that cynicism, you realize you will learn helplessness. I'm a victim. People are holding me back. They're not giving me what I deserve. I can't get ahead because somebody else is cheating me, right? But here's the difference. As a leader, what you realize is, if someone says to you, will you come up with a solution? You realize that's actually much harder. And then you realize, identifying problems actually takes no great skill. It's coming up with solutions that's infinitely harder, right? And that's where real leadership grows. It's going, no, I need to figure out, with the amount of influence I have, what can I do to affect change? With the influence God's given me, what can I do to make this place better? What can I do to serve better? That solutions orientation gives you hope because you maintain a sense of agency. But if you just become a critic, you'll learn helplessness. It's interesting, there was a study back in the 1970s, Martin Seligman did on dogs, which I'm sure they probably don't do these anymore. He was shocking dogs. And what he did was, basically, they took two groups of dogs and they put them in these harnesses, and the harnesses would administer electric shocks. And the first group of dogs, they would shock them, but there was a lever in the room, and when they hit the lever, it would turn the shocks off. So the dogs figured that out. Second group, they got hit with these shocks, but when they hit the lever, it didn't work. So no matter what they did, you still got shocked. Then they took those two groups of dogs and put them in a different scenario, one where half of a floor would shock you and the other half would not. And the first group that had agency to stop the shocks, as soon as they got shocked, they're like, no, sir. And they've realized, if we move over here, it's solved over here. They had a solutions orientation. Let me move, problem solved. The other group that before had learned no matter what we do, we're getting shocked. When they started getting shocked by the floor, they just stayed there and just kept getting hit. And he coined a frame. These dogs have learned helplessness. They've started to internalize, there's no agency for me. I can't do good. And if you cultivate a cynicism, beware that you don't learn helplessness. Now, let me clarify in this too. Some of you maybe were victimized when you were younger and you were helpless in a situation where someone had power over you, didn't care for you. And I'm not saying, well, you just need to change your attitude, have a solutions orientation. There are places in life where you go, I didn't have agency in this moment and I got hurt here, right? And honoring Jesus does not require making your sin stoop its shoulders. We can have sin stand at its full height and say, what happened to you was horrible, inexcusable, it was awful, but the good news of the gospel is where sin abounds, grace abounds more. And God can move in power and set us free from very dark things and very hard things. And what happens once you get out of an abusive environment, a difficult environment, what's so important is to remember when I'm free from that by the grace of God, I have agency. I don't have to learn. Because I was helpless back then doesn't mean I'm helpless now. Because I was hurt by then doesn't mean I'm always going to be hurt. That doesn't have to define my destiny. I can make good choices. I can make healthy decisions. I can make a difference in the world. I can move forward. And so in the midst of difficulty, when you identify problems, you don't have to pretend like they're not problems, but never in that moment lose your sense of God-given agency. I'm not going to become a cynic. I'm going to get a solutions orientation. Helen Keller said it this way. She said, the world is full of suffering, but it's also full of overcoming it. And so she knew what suffering was, but she didn't give up hope. But she found a way through it to a solutions orientation. That's the first thing I would say. It's interesting, as you move on, they said the hill country's not enough for, he said, cut the trees down. And then in verse 16, they respond. In verse 16, the people of Joseph said, the hill country's not enough for us. Yeah, he just said that. Joshua had just told them, the hill country's not enough room. And they're like, the hill country's not enough room. He's like, right. It's interesting, one way you could translate the way they're saying this is it's not available. That they looked at the trees on the hills and they're like, I don't know, it's not available. And they say, yet all the Canaanites who dwell in the plains have chariots of iron. So it's interesting. They say, we need more space. He's like, cut down trees. And they go, well, there's not enough room, and there's also chariots. So it's interesting. They could just be explaining facts, because they said two true things, and Joshua will affirm they're true. There are trees on the hills, and there are chariots in the plains. That's true. But it's the introduction of that word yet that you make it realize, oh, they're not just giving him information, they're whining. Well, we want more room, but there's trees in the mountains and chariots in the plain. You go, oh, okay. What they're saying is, we can't do it, or we shouldn't have to, or I don't want to. And what they're saying is, I wanted the inheritance without the irritation. I wanted the blessing of God, but I didn't want the road there to be bumpy, right? I didn't want the promise to come with pain. And so point number 2 that will give you courage in a discouraging day is to remember, life is hard. Good things are hard, and hard things can be good. Good things are hard, and hard things can be good. That's the way life works. The inheritance has irritants. It does. And yet that doesn't mean God is not good. It means that we're not home yet, that the world is not as it should be. The world is a broken place, and yet God can move in our lives even in the midst of the brokenness. And so it's okay to acknowledge we live in a broken world, but we need not live in despair. We go, yeah, the world's broken, and yet God can still do mighty things in it. Yeah, this inheritance has irritants, but God can still use us to make a way. And so there's something about that realism that's comforting. It's interesting, I have a professor, he was my Greek professor years ago, that was a quirky guy, very, very particular person. Like we mentioned the book of Ephesians the other week, that is 6 chapters. He wrote a commentary on Ephesians that's 1,000 pages. 1,000 pages on 6 chapters. He's a very exacting man. There was a story Prof told me where he came to pick him up at his house and waited downstairs for 45 minutes. And when Dr. Honer finally came downstairs, he was like, what took you so long? And he was walking out of his bedroom to come downstairs. And as he did it, he noticed that on their bookshelf, the screws, the Phillip head screws, weren't all aligned so that the crosses were in the same direction. And he was such an obsessive person, he had to get each screw to line up to look, and he ended up being 45 minutes late for this dinner. That's the kind of man Dr. Honer was. Now imagine that man in a marriage counseling session. When I got prepared to hear this story, I was like, I already love it. I already love it. Tell me the story. And this couple came in, and they're bickering, they're fighting, they don't like it. And Dr. Honer, in this moment, is listening to the bicker, this husband and wife, saying all the things they're doing wrong. And he stops them for a minute, and he was like, well, okay. He looks at the husband, and he was like, so let's make a list of all her flaws. And he gets out a whiteboard and a marker and starts asking him, like, is she a bad listener? Okay, all right, bad listener. Okay, doesn't encourage you enough? Okay, not an encourager. Doesn't cook as well? Okay, can't cook. Okay, let's keep going. What? Just all of them. What are all her flaws? And she's sitting over there going like, what kind of session is this? And this guy's like, well, she also doesn't respect me, And so he's like, all right, and just let the guy burn it all out. Let's fill the board with all of her flaws. And then when they had exhausted them all, Professor Honer goes, okay, let's try to exchange her flaws for some other flaws. So, not listening. Would you rather her be a compulsive gambler or given to fits of anger? And the guy's like, no, I don't want that. Oh, okay. Would you rather her steal, commit crimes? Or would you rather? And he's like, what? No, and on. He kept trying meticulously through every one to exchange flaws, and the guy wasn't willing to exchange any. And so finally, as the session came to the end, Dr. Honer was like, oh, so you don't want her to have different flaws, you want her to have no flaws. You just want her to be perfect. Yet there aren't any of those around. Are you one? No, we're not perfect. We're all flawed. And when you understand that, and you realize that, you go, but it can still be good. It can still be good. So life is hard this side of heaven. It is. There is a day by the grace of Jesus Christ where he will wipe away every tear. There is a day where there is hope and a future. It's coming. But we're not home yet. We're not home yet. And when you realize that, it actually kind of weirdly makes things okay. I'll tell you for us a little secret of how I deal with a lot of the frustrations in life. I found humor as a pathway to hope. There's something about laughter that can dispel sadness. And so Donna and I do this all the time when the kids are making us crazy, when they just don't respect my authority and things that I wish they would do different. I'll look over at Donna, and we've gotten the habit of saying like, someone needs to raise these kids. And what that does, it helps us like, oh yeah, are we expecting them to be perfect? No, that's the job of being a parent, is you gotta raise the kids. So yeah, they're imperfect, but that's the job, and we signed up for it and we like them, okay? We do that in ministry. When we're talking about leadership decisions or pastoral conundrums, trying to figure out how to serve y'all best, there comes times where it's really hard and the decision making's hard. And so I'll look at my staff and be like, oh, this ministry would be easy if it weren't for people. And the joke there is, yeah, we're in the people business. That's what we do, right? I do this every Sunday on my way home from work. If you're wondering, what does a pastor think about on his way home? For me, as I'm driving home, I think about the sermon I just preached. And I go like this. I wish I would have said that better. I wish I would have made that rhyme. I wish I would have made that a little tighter. I wish I would not have said that. And on, I pick apart the sermon, and overanalyzation tends to lead to depression. And so what I realized that I do in that moment is suddenly, and I did this without even thinking about it, I started imagining myself in an interview where someone was asking me, what do you wish you would have done better in the sermon? You're like, well, Bob, you got a little crazy up there. You know, and I start giving him all the things that I didn't go wrong, and I'll list like 10 things that I wish were better, and he'll go, well, you know, we're our own worst critic. And then I thought, yeah, but what if I'm not? And then I just imagined somebody who really hates me, like is a way bigger critic of me than me. I mean, he just sits at home and just fumes down in the basement listening to every message, just bile in his throat, just hates, has a board with all my misstatements tethered together with red yarn, connecting them, trying to prove that I'm a heretic. Some guy that just sits all day long and thinks about Ben Stuart's destruction. I imagine that guy, and then I imagine me meeting that guy, and I tell him, hey bro, take it easy. You know what you saw up there? A man doing his best, okay? I wanted it to be better too, okay? But I was doing my best, and I was faithful to the text. I think I honor Jesus. I think it helps some people. So just take it easy, bro. And what's happening by the time I get home? That's positive self-talk, right? I just needed a weird story to get there. And so that's what I do to realize, hey man, life is hard. Yes, I wish every sermon ushered in the kingdom, but they don't. And so life is hard, but it's also filled with overcoming it, right? And so I realized life's hard, and good things can be hard. That can be true. And hard things can be good, right? And that's important to keep in mind. And so they're unhappy because they see the irritations of the trees and the opposition of the Canaanites. And here Joshua presses in to respond to them in verse 17. And it takes a solemn tone. It's almost like when your mama uses your full name, you're like, okay. You see, Joshua was okay with the back and forth, and now he's gonna stamp this conversation to a close in verse 17. Then Joshua said to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, those are Joseph's kids, you are a numerous people, I affirm that, and you have great power, and you won't have one allotment only. He agrees with all the facts. But the hill country shall be yours, for though it's a forest, you shall clear it and possess it to its farthest borders. For you'll drive out the Canaanites, though they have chariots of iron, and though they are strong. What's interesting is they agree on all the facts. We're big, we're strong, there are trees, and there are Canaanites. And he said, yes, and big and strong, you'll cut down the trees and clear out the Canaanites. Go do it, right? And what's fascinating about that is they have the same facts, but totally different perspective. And that's what I'm trying to encourage us with. What they see is irritation and opposition. What he sees is provision and opportunity. There's all these trees. Yeah, cut them down. They make for great firewood and you can build your house with them. Hey, they got chariots of iron. Yes. And God said when he led us into the land, I will get glory when I use you to drive out the Canaanites. That you've got an opportunity for glory. How much better will be the win when they had chariots of iron and you just went walking out there and won anyway? It'll be the proof that you have a God who reigns over Israel. And so they just see irritation, they see opposition, and they think too big an obstacle. And he says, no, I see provision and I see opportunity. So let's go. It's all about how you choose to see. That's point number 3. In irritation, see provision. In opposition, see opportunity. God loves that. He loves to bless us through what initially doesn't look like a blessing. He does. So one of the first ministries I ever led was a college ministry on the campus of Texas A&M named Breakaway. Farmers Fight, hullabaloo. And I remember when we got there, we met in the basketball arena. The previous director had grown this thing. Students met in a basketball arena to worship every Tuesday night. It's amazing. When I showed up there, I was like, man, I just got to make sure I don't wreck this thing. And I remember it wasn't long into my tenure there that they got new management over that arena. And the new management came and said, hey, I noticed y'all aren't paying near enough. I'm going to triple your rent. And I remember thinking, you just killed us. We don't have the money for that. We won't be able to meet here. We won't be able to meet at all. I'm gonna be the guy who wrecked this thing. I became captain of the Titanic, like, thank you, sir, let's go. I was like, this is a personal nightmare. I'm gonna be a cautionary tale. I started doing all that. And then after all that freak out of discouragement, I started to go, well, what's a solutions orientation? If we can't meet there, is there anywhere else we can meet? And I literally got on Google Earth and was just sort of scanning the city. And I was like, there's a lot of chairs in the football stadium. But that was scary. I'm like, because that's even more seats, and if nobody shows up, it's gonna feel really bad in there. But we went for it and ministered to more students than we ever had in Breakaway's history. And then we moved to the field next door in the center of campus and reached double the number of students we were reaching, and the worship of our students could be heard over 2 miles away, because we got some big speakers that night. And I looked at that and I thought, we got to reach more students than ever, preach the gospel to more human beings than ever, and we would not have been there without this opposition. This opposition created the opportunity. God seems to love to do that, right? I remember for me, I got invited to write a book. It was very exciting. Like, I got presented with a book deal, like, oh my gosh, I can write a book. There's a book on sanctification, the spiritual life I've always wanted to write. And so when I was at Breakaway, I cleared a whole summer to write a book on how to walk with God, a sanctification book. And I spent months staring at an empty screen. I just couldn't do it. And I wanted to so bad. And I remember one day as a mental break, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to think about something else. And thought crossed my mind, if you were to write a book on dating, how would you do it? And within 5 minutes, I sketched out an entire outline of a book on how human beings move from singleness to dating to engagement to marriage. And as soon as I wrote it all out, the complete table of contents, I went, oh no, I'm trying to write this book. And what's in my mind is this book. But I don't want to be the dating guy. And dating is a minefield. I don't want to go skipping through that minefield. People are going to get upset. And I got real scared. I was like, I already committed to write this. I don't want to do this. But I felt like this was all that was in my head. This is the only book I can write. So I had to call the publishers back. I was very nervous. I was like, I know I said I would write this, but this is what's in my mind. And they actually said, that's probably better. And I'm like, really? Okay. And so I wrote it, and I delivered it as a sermon series at Breakaway. And it was my final series at Breakaway. It was my swan song to Breakaway is what I thought of it. I just thought of it as, this is my best advice how to navigate the tricky world of relationships. I'm sorry, good luck, kids. That's all I got. I just kind of thought of it that way. But we wrote the book and it came out. And then through, long story short, we moved up here to launch a church. And I remember as we moved up here, I was meeting with people strategically before we launched the church. And someone connected me with the chief of staff of a senator. And so I got a suit, went to the Capitol, sat down, and I just asked him the big question, how can I serve your people? And I remember he went, nobody knows how to date. The relationships are a mess, even the married ones. He said, do you think you'll speak to that? I was like, maybe so. And then here's the crazy thing. Before we even launched as a church, I got a call from the chaplain of the Senate's office. They asked if I would speak on dating and relationships at the Capitol. So I showed up there, bought a nicer suit, showed up, and when I got there, he was like, hey, we've had to move this meeting to 3 different rooms because we keep outgrowing these rooms. Are you famous? And I was like, obviously not. If you have to ask that question, it kind of answers itself, doesn't it? I said, it's the topic, I assure you, right? But here's the funny thing. One of my favorite preachers to listen to growing up when I was young, he would always in these sermons go, if I'm ever invited to the Capitol to speak, this is my text. And it was usually a text from like Revelation or Daniel, real apocalyptic stuff. And so I showed up there and I just couldn't get his head out of my mind. I'm like, if I ever preach at the Capitol, I'm gonna talk about dating, right? And I thought, who knew that that was the doorway into the Capitol? That the fact that I was the last of my friends to get married and wrote a book I resisted writing turned out to be the way to get ready to launch a church in D.C. No one writes that story. That wouldn't make sense. Well, here's the key to leadership in D.C. You want to go and do a college ministry in a little town and write a book on dating? That's not a path. That's not a thing people do. But it's what God does, because he just loves to make irritation into provision. He loves to make hostility into opportunity. And so for us, I mean, many of you know the story. When COVID hit, we were trying desperately to find a place to meet, a place we could gather as restrictions were loosening, but a lot of buildings just weren't ready to open. So we called 50 different places for Easter. We wanted to have an Easter gathering, and we wanted to do it outdoors. So we were at the point, we were calling parking lots, open fields, baseball fields, anybody. They all said no. And we finally got to a place where I'm like, I don't know who else to call. And we got one email back from the National Park Service. They told us no to this one little parking area we wanted to use, but they said, yes, you can use the National Mall. And it was like, wait, what? I don't even know that we asked for that. Like, I don't know that I'm ready for that. Like, but we had like a day to decide. And we were like, I don't want to say no out of fear. And we did Easter on the National Mall, and thousands of people came, and in a difficult day, had the opportunity to worship. And we preached the gospel in the center of the National Mall as far as you could. We got noise complaints on Capitol Hill, actually. We use very big speakers. And I remember in that moment thinking, and we would not have been there if we didn't have the opposition that forced us. And so I've just realized over time, when life's not working my way, maybe God has a better way. That doesn't mean I have to enjoy every pain or every discouragement, but I have come to a place of trust that what I see as irritation, God sees as provision. What I see often as hostility actually will become possibility. And here's where we'll close, because you hear that and some of you go, well, Ben, that's sort of useful, but this message isn't particularly Christian. It just sounds like a pump-up speech. Like, make moves and make excuses. Like, is that what you're saying? Like, you got to get out there and hustle, kids. Like, is that what you're doing? Like, what is this? Well, no, here's the last point, and I think it's what's so important. Point number 4 is faith in a faithful God produces humble confidence and the hope needed for a courageous spirit. Faith in a faithful God is what produces the humble confidence and the hope needed for a courageous spirit. See, here's the interesting thing. The children of Joseph are discouraged in this moment. We just thought this would be easier. It's not, but God is still good. And yet, just a couple chapters before, we read it, I won't reread it, there's a very different conversation that takes place with Caleb. If you recall, when the nation of Israel was first coming up to the borders of the promised land, Moses sent 12 spies into the land, and they came back, and 10 of them said, hey, the land is beautiful, but there's giants there. They're going to kill us all. Run away. And they're just like, God has cheated us. And they freak out. There's only 2 people that don't, to quote our text, made the hearts of the people melt. It was Joshua and Caleb. Said, yeah, there's challenges, but we got God with us. Yeah, there's difficulty, but there's opportunity. Let's go. The nation wouldn't go with them. So God said, well, I'm going to get glory. I'll just do it with a different generation. And so this generation will die in the wilderness. The young generation will come and take the land. And only 2 old people got to hang with the young ones, Joshua and Caleb. And here we saw Caleb's spirit. When he comes up, he has an issue with his inheritance. But when he comes up to Joshua, it's a totally different conversation. He says, you remember when God called us? He said, you remember I spoke what was in my heart, and my heart wholly followed the Lord. The Lord promised to be with us, and I agreed with him. And though the people's heart melted, God preserved my strength. And he said, and so I'm 85 and I'm as strong as I was back then. And then he says, so Joshua, that piece of land where their hearts melted, where the giants were, that's what the name Anakim means. He says, if I may, I want that part. Give me the hill country with the giants, because it just might be the Lord will be with me and we'll get glory there. So he doesn't say, but there's trees, but there's chariots. He says, no, but there's a God in Israel and I'm going with him. So give me the toughest hill, I want it. But notice he's not beating his chest. He's not saying, because my name's Caleb, 85 and still alive. He says, the Lord promised us. The Lord led us here. The Lord preserved me. And then he says, and maybe the Lord will be with me. There's a humility to it. I'm not gonna presume God's gonna make things work my way, but I have a confidence that he's leading us in a good way. He made a promise that he's working out this great story, and I'm on for the ride. He didn't promise an easy life, but he promised us an adventure, and I'm going with him. He gets my whole heart. And here's where this applies to us as we close. It's interesting, in Hebrew, the original language this was written in, there aren't any J's. So Joshua is Yeshua. Same name we translate in a different way in the New Testament. In Greek, they translate Yeshua as Yesu, which we translate Jesus. Same name. And what's interesting back here is they were following the hero Joshua, who led them into the promised land, this particular piece of real estate. But it's still on planet Earth, and the earth's still broken. But why was God doing this in the Old Testament? It was so the seed of Abraham, Yeshua, would show up at a given time, Jesus Christ. And our Jesus did what their hero did back then. Joshua led them into the promised land. And Jesus leads us. He stepped onto that piece of soil. Why was that land so strategic? Because it's the only place on the planet that connects 3 major continents. That God protected the most strategic piece of real estate to get his message out. And then God, at just the right time, Romans tells us, did not stand aloof from our pain. What happened? The Prince of Peace entered it. He said, I'm gonna step into your suffering. I'm gonna step into your pain. I'm not gonna tell you to get over it. I'm gonna get underneath it. And he who knew no sin became sin for us. He said, I'll take on your punishment. I'll take on your guilt, your condemnation, your shame. I will take on your difficulty, and it will bury me. And yet when Jesus Christ was the perfect sacrifice for us, God took the darkest day in human history, the death of the Son of God, and he made it the instrument of our redemption. That his difficulty was our deliverance, that he took our sin so we might have his righteousness, that he took our alienation from God so that we might have a home and a future when God calls us. Do you see that? And so they didn't realize God is setting us up for this story, but they played their part. And when Jesus Christ came and we give our hearts wholly to him, he told his disciples, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, because I've overcome the world. And so for us, we don't have to beat our chest and try to find courage in our chest. We find courage by looking up at Christ, saying, you know what? He's not calling me to do something he wasn't willing to do. Joshua wasn't telling them to do something he didn't do. Joshua led them into that land. And Jesus Christ is telling us to endure in a difficult day and not lose heart. And he says, if you want proof, look at me. That I entered into the cave of death. And I entered into that cave and punched through the back and made it a tunnel. So that death is not the end, but there's hope and light and a future because of the finished work of Jesus Christ. And then Jesus stands at the end of the tunnel, peers through to us and says, okay, your turn, follow me. And you go, but that cave looks dark. Yeah, super dark. That looks like the valley of the shadow of death. Yeah, totally. But there's hardship in there. Assuredly, yes. Well, there's trees and Canaanites. Yeah, 100%, yes. But you will pass through the valley of the shadow of death and find life on the other side. And if God used my pain as an instrument for redemption, he will use your pain as an instrument for proclamation of a God who came to save. You have purpose, you have hope, you have a future because of Jesus Christ. So we don't have to look at our hearts, we look up at his. And we say, I got faith in a faithful God. He did what he said he would do, and so I trust him. That doesn't mean he'll give me everything I want, but it means that he's good, and he lets me be a part of the adventure. So I'm not gonna sink in cynicism. I'm gonna look at the solutions. I'm gonna look around and see the opposition as opportunity. How can I serve you well here? And I'm gonna have humility, but I'm gonna have courage because I follow a king who made a way for me.